Okay. My name is Chuck Wade. I'm going to be your presenter tonight, and I want to welcome each and every one of you to this presentation of the 8th Annual UFO Film Festival here at the historic Morrow Theater. Thank you. And this Morrow Theater is in downtown Gallup, New Mexico. For those of you that were here last year for this 7th Annual Film Festival, as I was introducing the third film, 3 aliens come off the side over there carrying a birthday cake. And the audience stood up and sang happy birthday to me. That was absolutely fun and totally unexpected. What I've done this year, I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to invite everybody in this audience to cake and ice cream tomorrow at the Denny's restaurant on the east side of town, about 10 to 12, to celebrate my 72nd birthday. And not only do I want to celebrate my birthday, I want to celebrate each and every one of your birthdays. Also, this coming year, New Mexico is going to celebrate its 100th birthday. New Mexico became a state in January the 6th, 1912. And I'd like to share just a little bit with you about the state of New Mexico. If we could have the map here on. That worked out well. New Mexico is the 5th largest state in the Union after Alaska, Texas, Montana, and California. The state is about 400 miles from top to bottom, which would be north to south, and about 350 miles east to west. It's quite a large state with about 121,000 square miles. We have quite a number of prominent towns in the state, but I won't go through those at this time. And there are about 2 million people that have the good fortune to live in the state of New Mexico. My father, Jesse Wade, was born near the town of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, in February the 2nd, 1902. That was 1 year before the Wright brothers made the first airplane flight. The very first year. I mean, just 1 year after that first. And anyway, whenever Dad was 12 years old, I'm going to back up, folks. My dad was 10 years old in 1912. His parents loaded him and all their belongings into a horse-drawn covered wagon and came to New Mexico as homesteaders. My grandparents homesteaded about 20 miles east of Corona. My father went through the Depression as a one-man hard rock gold miner in a little mountains just about 40 miles south of Corona. In 1934, just after the Depression, my father was going through Corona with a vial of gold in his pocket, and he stopped at the bar there in Corona. And before the night was over, my dad had traded that vial of gold for the bar. And he and my mother, my dad and my mother, owned and operated the Corona bar for 42 years, retiring in 1976. In the summer of 1947, my dad was tending bar there in Corona. Whenever Mac Brazel come in to the, I was expecting that, but I don't think I'll need it unless y'all need it, that overhead light. Yeah, that's much better. Dad was tending bar there in Corona, and whenever Mac Brazel drove up in his old pickup truck. And Mac was quite agitated because something had, basically crashed out on the Foster Ranch. And the Foster Ranch is about 30 miles southeast of Corona. And Mac absolutely had no idea what had crashed out there, but it left a whole lot of debris. And Mac tried very much to get my father to go out to see it, whatever the heck had happened out there. But my dad suggested Mac go to Roswell and report this event, whatever it may have been, to the military there in Roswell. Well, Mac did go to Roswell, but he reported this event and all that debris to Sheriff Wilcox there at Roswell, and the sheriff in turn reported it to the military. And the Roswell incident started. The military went out to the crash site and they, over time, cleaned it up very, very thoroughly. But on July the 8th, the headlines of the Roswell paper stated the Roswell Army Air Force had captured a UFO on the ranch outside of Roswell. Well, that only lasted a little while, and then the next day, the military had the newspaper put on in their newspaper that wasn't a flying saucer. That thing was a weather balloon, and that event died. And it was just totally dead for many years. And then in 1980, a book called The Roswell Incident came out. In this book, there was 2 crashes, one at Corona and one on the plains of San Augustine. Over time, and I've been studying the UFO. Oh, here we go. In that book, The Roswell Incident, there was a picture of Bill Brazel in there in the book, and in the caption under Bill's picture, it had Bill saying that he had parts and pieces of the UFO crash there by Corona on the Foster Ranch in the bar there in Corona. That was my dad's bar. And then 2 or 3 days later, here came the military and took those parts and pieces away, never to be seen again. Whenever I read that about Bill Brazel in the book, I phoned up Bill because he lived in Capitan, New Mexico at the time. And we had a nice chat. He wanted to know how Mother was doing because my dad had passed away 3 years before that. And Mother was doing fine. And then I asked Bill very succinctly, Bill, is the caption under this picture true? And he said yes. Folks, I have been wanting to know what happened there at Corona for the last 30 years. And over time, I have learned a tremendous amount of information about the crashes in New Mexico in 1945 through 1948. So I have been a student for the last 30 years, and what I'd like to do tonight is give you some information about the 7 crashes and retrievals in New Mexico in the years 1945 1947. The first crash that we know of happened near San Antonio, New Mexico. And that's number 1 here on the screen. And what I'm going to do is go around through all 7 crashes, just point them out and let you get familiar with where they are on the map. And then I'm going to go back through, give you a little bit of history of each craft. And then the third time I'm going to go through is my theory of why these crashes crashed. There is a definite reason for it, and I would like to share with you my thoughts. Okay, I just mentioned the first crash was at San Antonio on August 1945. In July, the first few days of July 1947, the second crash happened on the plains of San Augustine. And folks, I believe that crash happened because I hold in my hand several small pieces of that craft that we physically retrieved from that crash site in 2004. I've been there several times since then, and folks, that happened. They all happened. The third crash I'm going to talk about is about 40 miles southwest of Roswell. Roswell is here. The third crash is here. At this time, we don't know much about that crash because it only came to light about 2 years ago. This thing is really, really hung up and covered up until somebody comes forward that knows something about it. We don't know. But a lady came forward about 2 years ago, and 2 very good friends of mine are researching this crash here southwest of Roswell. at number 3. Number 4, 5, and 6 becomes a little bit complicated because what you hear, and whenever they're talking about the Roswell crash, they're talking about the crash that crashed close to Corona, which is number 5. But there were 2 other crashes within just seconds of each other, and there was a eyewitness to the flashes that caused these three crashes. So I'm going to say that the crash number 4, which is here, which is about 40 miles north of Roswell, was the fourth crash on the night of the 4th of July. A few seconds later, the 5th crash was northwest of Roswell, about 80 miles, about 30 miles from southeast of Corona. And the 6th crash we've named the Jim Ragsdale site, and it's on the side of the very large Capitan Mountain. And then the 7th crash was north of us here at Aztec. This crash was about 9 miles north of Aztec, and it crashed in March 1948, which would be about 9 months after the crash is there by Roswell. That's the 7th. The San Antonio crash, the plains of San Augustine, the alternative site we don't know much about. 4 is the Walter Hott Colonel Corso. The 5, Corona debris field. 6, the Jim Ragsdale site. And the 7th, Aztec. Okay, now what I want to do is go through just a little bit and tell what happened at each one of these crash sites. In 1945, Los Alamos, which is up here, but that's right now, it doesn't really matter, but Los Alamos built the first atomic bomb, and they brought the atomic bomb down to this area here and detonated the first and tested the very first atomic bomb on the 16th of July, 1945. About 1 month later, there was 2 little boys out looking for a cow on their father's ranch, and they heard this really loud noise. So they wanted to know what happened. So they went over a couple of hills there, and they came upon a crashed UFO. And this craft was about 25 foot long, and to these boys it looked like an avocado. And there was also 2 aliens running around this craft. So these boys reported this craft crashed to their parents, and then the military came out and hauled it away. But for the next several days, these 2 boys hid and watched the military take this craft away. And they never did know what happened to the 2 aliens, but they also retrieved a piece of that craft, and those boys still have it today. It's been analyzed, and you can read a lot about this. These 2 boys and the crash on the plains of San Augustine in the book by Paula Harris, which came out earlier this year. I'm sure it's a good book, because Paula is a wonderful researcher. Now I'll turn our attention to other crashes in 1947. And in June of 1947, there's a fellow up in the state of Oregon named Kenneth Arnold. And he saw 9 UFOs flying in formation about 1,500 miles an hour. And in those days, in 1947, that was really, really fast. And that made national news from one end of the nation to the other. There's lots of information in the local newspapers, but this is basically the first time that these UFOs made the national news. So somebody somewhere gave an order to let's shoot one of these things down. First off, I need to go back to number 1 and tell how that number 1 came to crash on down in San Antonio. I left that out a minute ago. What it is, whenever they were building an atomic bomb in Los Alamos, they were also building a very large radar system south of Trinity site, where the first bomb was to be tested. So there's Oscuro Peak down here, and what I think, whenever that UFO was looking around where that UFO, that atomic bomb had been tested. That UFO tangled up with the radar beams out of that radar and crashed. I think it was totally by accident the first one crashed. But then somebody in 1947, after Kenneth Arnold saw those 7 or 9 UFOs, somebody said, bring one down. So they were building a very large mobile radar station as mobile down here in the White Sands Missile Range. So whenever they got the orders, they took that large radar unit from here over to the plains of St. Augustine. In the early days of 1947, July, they brought down a UFO. And I'll tell more about that later. It is my theory now, after they brought that craft down on the plains of St. Augustine, the military moved that mobile unit over north of Roswell, somewhere in this area here, because they had to go and look to the side of this mountain here. So about 11 o'clock at night on July the 4th, we have affidavits to say this. The military, they didn't say about the military, but they just flashes and crashes. About 11 o'clock at night, the military brought down this craft here, known as Hot Colonel Corso site. And this craft lit up. It lit up like a welder's torch, and it lit up the desert and the distant mountains. I mean, that was a big flash. But what it did, it immediately went out, and then it crashed, and the military did not know that they had shot that craft down. Very shortly after it came down, some civilians found it. They reported that crash to the military down here south of Roswell, and the military post haste went up there and retrieved number 4. Also, that same night, about 3 seconds after the first flash, there was another flash right here, and these by eyewitnesses. And this craft, number 5 there at the Corona, also flared up and lit up the desert and the mountains and crashed. Once again, the military did not know they'd shot it down. Therefore, Mac Brazel found this craft like the next day, came to Corona to get my father to go out to see it. But what also happened that same night, about 3 or 4 seconds after these other two, there was a third flash. And it was out here someplace. But what happened on the third crash, this thing flared up really big, but this thing is producing its own electricity and a lot of power, and that radar messed it up where it was shorting out. Like whenever you put 2 wires together, it goes pop. Well, Jim Ragsdale in his affidavit said that the thing was bright as a welder torch coming at him, and it made just a terrible noise. And he and his girlfriend were camping on the side of the Capitan Mountains, and this craft came really close to them. It never crashed. It went through the trees and hit a big rock. And a little while later, Jim and his girlfriend went over to it. They had an old flashlight, and Jim was able to get into that craft and verify there were 4 dead aliens there. Jim and his girlfriend went back to the camp, to the truck that night, and early in the next morning, they was out gathering up a couple of gunny sacks of parts and pieces, these foils. And then here came the military. Folks, I spent 30 years in the military now, retired naval officer. The military doesn't work overnight. You cannot have a flash in the middle of the night about 11 o'clock and have the military show up the next morning. Therefore, it's my contention that these flashes were made on these 3 crafts by the military's high-powered radar hitting the crafts and flashing and crashing, and on the number 6, the military found it. A year, actually it's 9 months later, in March 1948, there was a 100-foot craft going over the area of Aztec, New Mexico. And once again, somebody gave an order to bring that dude down. And what happened is, not only had the military made 3 radar sites over time. They made the mobile unit down here at White Sands, and then they moved it up to Morrow. That was the mobile unit. They also made a very large radar just outside of Gallup here at Continental Divide. They also put a very large high-powered radar out here in El Vado to guard the skies over Los Alamos. Because I feel that they knew that the UFOs were flying around, and they knew that they had crashed a UFO down here in San Antonio. So they made these very large radars, not only to bring down airplanes, but I feel they made it to bring down UFOs. And they were very successful, because it's my theory now that the radar unit here in El Vado hit that 100-foot craft, and it crashed about 9 miles north of Aztec. So that's my second time going around. The third time I'm going around, I'm going to give a little bit more of my thoughts about how they crashed. And I gave some good hints as I was going along. This first one crashed down here in August 1945 by having the radar from Oscar Peak hit the radar accidentally and crashed. Then in 1947, they brought this mobile unit over to the plains of San Augustine and brought that craft down that I had parts of here on my table. Then they went from over here at plains of Augustine with that mobile unit over here east of Corona, and they brought down 4, 5, and 6. And that was in July 1947. Then 9 months later, they brought down this 100-foot craft up here in by Aztec. I don't think I told the size of all these craft as I was going along. So I remember I said about the one down here is about 20 foot long and looked like an avocado. We know that the craft over here at the plains of San Augustine was 32 foot in diameter, round, and there were four aliens on it. One was alive, one was injured, and 2 dead. We know there's some dead aliens here on 3, but we don't know yet how many. There was like at least 2 aliens come out of the craft here on 4. 5, we know there's some aliens died there because they had some really good information on the photographers that took pictures of them. And we know for a fact, per affidavit, that there were 4 dead aliens on the one here, and they're on the plains of on the side of the Capitan Mountain, known as the Jim Ragsdale site, and we know up here at number 7 in Aztec, there were 16 dead aliens. A friend of mine here in the Gallup area, and he hasn't come forward with an affidavit, but he has told me that his dad worked out on the Navajo Nation, was a Navajo fellow, and they heard about this crash up in Aztec, and my friend's father and this guy went up there and physically saw the craft, and they told my friend, the father told my friend, that there were these 16 dead aliens were fried to a crisp. So being that all that energy is in those things, and everything got the microwave or radar onto it, things got really, really hot inside that cap. Okay, that's my 3 rings around here. And now what I'd like to do is spend quite a lot of time on the plains of San Augustine, because I've been there. I've got these pieces of foil here. And what it is, there was a family from Albuquerque named the Anderson family. And they came from Albuquerque that morning of the first week of July. And they came over to the plains of San Augustine to look for moss agate. And boy, did they find something. And one of the fellows that was with the Anderson family was a 5-year-old boy. His name was Gerald Anderson. And he was there. They was going along, looked over this little hill. It's not very high. And they saw things. And folks, rather than me telling you about what Gerald Anderson said, May I introduce you to Gerald Anderson and let him tell you. Welcome Gerald to the stage. And this is this is Gerald Anderson, now 70 years old, and this is what Gerald saw. And this is Gerald Anderson. Thank you very much, and sure good to see all of you here tonight. This is going to be a very important night. We have Christ debris on the table up here that came from the Plains of San Augustine site. I was 5 years old when we moved from Indiana to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the reason we moved there is my family, my dad's family, is all from New Mexico. And my dad was a master machinist that worked at Allison Aviation in Indianapolis, Indiana. And his specialty was tool and die making. Well, the relatives out there in New Mexico all said that the Atomic Energy Commission was hiring machinists, and that he ought to come out there and bring his family out. So we moved out there and arrived in Albuquerque on the 3rd of July, early in the morning. And the next day, being the 4th of July, being a national holiday, we had the opportunity to meet relatives and everything. And my Uncle Ted, his brother-in-law, his wife, his sister down there in Magdalena, New Mexico, they wanted to take us down here and introduce us to that side of the family we hadn't met yet. So really early in the morning, about 5 in the morning, my brother Glenn, who was home on leave from the Marine Corps and had met us in Albuquerque, my father, myself, my Uncle Ted, and my cousin Victor, all loaded up in my dad's 1940 Plymouth automobile. No air conditioning back in those days, I might add, except you opened the windows and drove as fast as you could. We got down to Magdalena in about 2.5 hours, I think it was, something like that. And we met John Trujillo and his family. And John worked as a miner around Magdalena, I think just north of Magdalena, as a matter of fact. And if I remember correctly, it has something to do with silver mines, but don't quote me on that because I'm not really sure. We spent some time there, and my brother, Glenn, was a, what you'd call a rock hound, an amateur geologist. And later, after he got out of the Marine Corps, he graduated from the University of New Mexico at Albuquerque as a geologist and spent most of the rest of his life doing that kind of thing. He was very interested in the minerals around that area, and he had asked John Trujillo if he knew of any place around there where there was moss agate. Well, John and Uncle Ted used to hunt south of Gallup down there on the plains in the foothills, and John said, oh yeah, there's a lot of moss agate down there. You need to go out there and you'll find plenty of it. So he had to go to work that night at midnight because he worked the night shift at the mines. And so we left and headed out toward Gallup. And John had, he had to spend some time with his family and then get some sleep that night. So we didn't make it a big, long, daily affair. And we drove down to Gallup and then south from Gallup down to this area where they hunted. Well, along the highway, and the highway at that time was a dirt road, basically. It was a dirt highway. There was no pavement or anything like that there. There was a fence line along to the south side of the road, and we went through a gate, an old barbed wire gate. You know the kind that you just loop over the other post? Well, we drove out onto kind of a bluff line,
and out among some pinon trees there, and he stopped the car, and we all got out, and Uncle Ted said, well, we go down in this arroyo, and go down farther, that's where we hunt back in there, and that's where you're going to find this stuff. So we go down in the arroyo, and we're walking south down the arroyo, and we come to a curve in the arroyo where it did this. And as we came around that curve, right in front of us, stuck in a small ridge line, was a big silver disc. Well, everybody stopped dead in their tracks, and Uncle Ted, I believe, said, that's a plane crash up there, and there's people up there. And, of course, they turned around to Victor and I. He was 6 and I was 5. You kids stay right here. Don't move, you know. Well, you're not going to tell no 5 or 6-year-old kid not to follow the parents in a situation like that. Well, anyway, they took off up the arroyo toward this object. They got up there about 150 feet, and my brother came to a dead halt and said, wait a minute, that's not an airplane. That's a GD spaceship. And I'm not going to say that because there's children present. Okay? And then they really told us, you stay here, you don't come near this, you know. And they all walked up there. Well, of course, Victor and I ran right up there with them. Now, you could see over to the southeast where this thing had come down and had hit on this high ridge line up there. You can see down trees up there and this big impact crater-like affair. And it apparently had hit there, bounced over, come down into the arroyo, and cut a trench just like this right across the arroyo. A big trench, because this thing was about 32 feet in diameter. All right? It came to rest on a small boulder-strewn ridge line. Now, when I say boulder-strewn, I'm talking about boulders approximately the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. This thing had plowed underneath that ridge line and plowed up like this and scattered these boulders. There's debris laying everywhere. A lot of debris that looks like that thing right there. That kind of debris. There was foil-like material on the ground. There was pieces of what looked like I-beams with writing on them, strange symbols on them that were maroon in color. And up under the edge, in the shade, underneath this disc, we see 4 individuals. Now, we've stopped calling them individuals over the years. We now call them extraterrestrial biological entities. All right? Why, I don't know. They were individuals, and there was 4 of them. Anyways, they were all laid out. There was 3 of them laid out on the ground on that silvery, foil-like material. 2 of them were motionless. 1 of them was moving around like he was in pain, or it was in pain. And next to it, sitting cross-legged, almost in a meditation pose, was another individual that apparently wasn't that badly hurt. And there was open containers on the ground. And there was material in those containers and on the one that was writhing around, presumably in pain, that looks very similar to the type of elastic bandages that we see today, where they just wrap it around your arm and it sticks to itself. Very similar to that. These 4 individuals had very large heads, very big eyes, no visible ears, very small nose, and just a slit for a mouth. They were very slender. Visualize me at 5 years old. I'm about this big, and that's about how big they were. They were very slender, had long, slender fingers. I've mentioned several times to other researchers that these guys would have made a very good violinist because of those fingers, because they were very long, the 2 centermen. Okay? And they were wearing one-piece flight suits. I guess I could say uniform, but flight suits seemed to suit better because they were all one piece, including the footwear. They fit tight around their neck. They were silver in color. The piping on the uniforms very similar to military type piping that you would see on military uniforms. When we first walked up there, the first reaction of the one that was sitting there cross-legged was something like this. He was obviously very scared of us. My cousin Victor is running all over the place looking at stuff. The adults are standing there looking at this thing, trying to talk to it. And my Uncle Ted spoke fluent Spanish and English. And my dad spoke English. And I spoke a little bit at that stage in my life. And it was so hot out there. You know, I wasn't used to this kind of heat. I came from a place where it gets hot and humid, but that dry desert heat's like a blast furnace, you know, and it was really getting to me. So there was shade underneath that disc. So I went down there and I got under the disc, and the thing that I remember the most about that is it was ice cold in that shade. It wasn't cool. It was ice cold, like I was in a freezer. And you put your hand on the side of that thing, it was like it just came out of a freezer. You get the impression that you might leave your hand stuck to that, you know. It was that cold under there. Well, that plays into some of the theories on how these things work and what happens. But anyway, I'm standing there and I'm looking down at these things, and when I first saw them, I honestly believed they were dogs, because they didn't look like humans, anybody I'd ever seen before. The problem was they were moving, and I never saw dolls move. So anyways, I'm standing there looking at one of them. It may be because of family traditions. For some reason, anyways, I just reached down and touched it. And I suddenly realized that that thing was dead. Because family tradition about, kissing, Roman Catholic tradition about kissing dead relatives goodbye, and they're dead. There's no question in your mind they're dead. Okay? The other one is still writhing around over there. They're still trying to talk to it. And I don't know, after I touched that thing, it scared me. I ran around behind my parents and my uncle and my brother, And I looked down like this. I could see him sitting right there between them. And he looked at me, and when he looked at me, I started getting all kinds of funny sensations, and it scared me. And I ran back across the arroyo. And you know how far it is across there. It's quite a ways across that arroyo. And I ran up on the rocks, and I could look down, and I could see all this. And while I was standing up there, you hear a motor coming in. I was looking out on the plains. I could see a lot of dust trails out there, like a car makes when it's going off down the dirt road. And there was a lot of airplanes in the air. Well, we just got through with World War II, and I lived in a city where they made the Norden bomb sites, which are top secret bomb sites. So the sky was always full of airplanes there, always. So seeing airplanes, a lot of airplanes didn't register. And off in the distance, I could see a windmill way back over there. And all of a sudden, we hear this motor coming. And a gray pickup pulls up on top of that ridgeline, back behind the saucer. And it has a whip antenna on it. It's gray in color. And a man gets out of that vehicle that was wearing one of those gray Stetsons with the flat brim. And he had glasses, I couldn't see it from there, but I did see him up close later. Well, I got curious and ran back down over there, and this man by this time had come down through the boulder field around that disc and was talking to my family. And he told them that he worked out on the plains and that he made maps. Well, we believe to this day that man was probably Barney Barnett. And the reason I remember him so well is everybody knew, all the kids knew from movie tone news, you know, in the theaters, what Harry Truman looked like. And this guy looked a lot like Harry Truman. He was dressed in, you know, khaki clothes and that hat and everything. And it wasn't but a few, 20 minutes or so, here comes a group of people up from the plains, up the Arroyo. And it turns out that these were students and their professor, who were archaeologists, was working on Bat Cave across the plains. Now that's quite a hike across those plains. It's a long ways. Now, I'm not sure that they walked all that way or if they drove their vehicles part of the way and then walked up there. But they maintained that they had seen this thing come down the night before. And they thought it was a meteor. Because when it was coming in, it was a lot of flashes and what looked like fire and stuff, and they seen it hit the ground, they thought it was a meteorite. Well, the next morning, somebody in the party had said, well, I don't think that's a meteorite because that thing turned. Meteorites don't turn. Well, it could have been an optical illusion. So that's what they said. But the next morning, when the sun came up, they could see the sun reflecting off the metal on the other side of the playa out there. So that's why they came over there. Well, they're walking around over there and they're talking, and this professor apparently spoke several different foreign languages. And this guy is bent down like this, and he's talking to this guy in all these different languages, and this thing is just sitting there looking at him like, doesn't understand. They're not communicating. It's not working. And we started hearing more motors. And right up there by where his pickup truck was, here comes a military staff car with a big star on the side of it. Right behind it is a 6x. And for those of you who don't know what a 6x is, it's like an old-style military truck with a canvas top on it. And out of the back of that thing came all of these soldiers with guns. They're wearing military police patches on their arms. They started screaming, back off, back off, back off, and they're pointing guns at everybody, threatening to shoot if we don't back off. And this staff car, the guy that's driving it, he looks like a young man, and out of the other side comes a black sergeant. My brother told me later he was a master sergeant. He was scared to death to let them know that he was a Marine on leave. He didn't want them to know that. Well, out of the back seat of this thing comes this Army officer, a red-headed Army officer who was a captain. And this guy was probably the nastiest, foul-mouthed individual I have ever met in my life. Screaming insults at everybody, giving orders, back them off or shoot them. They were pointing guns at everybody. Now, I'm a 5-year-old kid. I'm this big. And here's this soldier standing here with a Garand rifle. And I know it was a Garand rifle because years later when I went into the military, I fired those things. I knew what they looked like. Pointing it at me. Now, I'm a real threat to national security, okay, when I'm 5 years old. But they didn't want us around that thing. When they showed up, the one surviving entity absolutely went into a panic. He was scared to death. Well, they run us all off. They threatened the adults that if they ever wanted to see their kids again and didn't want to spend the rest of their lives in a military prison, is what this guy said, better never open your mouth about this, and you start walking that way. Well, they took all of us, including this guy we thought was Barney Barnett, the archaeologists, okay, my family, myself, and they moved us back up that arroyo at gunpoint, and they had a Jeep right there with a guy standing up on there and a machine gun mounted on that thing. They took us right back up to that car. They knew where our car was at. Made us get out, get in the car, and that Jeep escorted us back out through that little gate onto that dirt highway. And the rest of them had been brought up there at that time, and we're all sitting there, you know. We were told not to get out of the car. Well, they told us, go that way. You go back to Delta. Keep going and don't stop, and remember what we told you. The last thing I remember seeing was out the back window of that 1940 Plymouth. I could see that professor and those students and this guy we believe was Barney Barnett. And the professor was shaking his hand like this in this Army officer's face and kept pointing back over across the playa toward where that cave would be at. And Barney Barnett was standing there talking to some other military personnel. And when we got back up on the highway, I didn't mention this, but there was trucks, ambulances, airplanes, big flatbed truck with a crane on it. There was another flatbed up there that had bulldozers on it. It was like an invasion force. They were not one bit surprised at what they found there. The only thing that surprised them was all the civilians that was there. They weren't surprised about what they were looking for. They knew what they were looking for. We were the surprise. Well, they got rid of us real quick. And we headed out of there and back to Dallas as fast as we could go. Because in all honesty, I spent some time in the military and I've been in combat zones. And to me, my memory of that day, that whole thing looked like a massive invasion force. They were armed. They meant business, and I don't think they would have had 1 minute's hesitation or 1 second's hesitation to shoot somebody if they thought it was necessary to do so. Whatever happened to the aliens and whatever happened to that disc, I don't know. We were told later on by John Trujillo that coming home from work about 3 days after that, he was back on the swing shift then, and it was about midnight when he came home. The military was there in Magdalena, and they had the road blocked off, and they had armed escorts. And something came through town under military escort on a flatbed truck, and he described it as laying like this on its side on the flatbed, like they haul glass nowadays, and it was covered up. And you couldn't see what it was. And it kept going east towards Sapporo. And once they had went past, he was told he could go on, and the military just took off and followed it. So we believe that it was probably taken down to the railroad tracks down there below Sapporo, put on a train, and taken to Lamy, New Mexico, and taken off and trucked to Los Alamos, because years later, evidence popped up that that's where the saucer and the debris and the bodies of the aliens and the one live alien had actually gone was to Los Alamos first, or even possibly Albuquerque. Nobody knows for sure. Because at the time, Wyoming Boulevard went out of Sandia Base north and then turned at what is now Hoffmantown, went down. It was a highway that they had built for the military down to a very secure, secret area down there where they hauled stuff from Sandia Base around that Wyoming Boulevard and down Manal, down to that area, put on trains and sent north to Lamy, where it was taken off and ferried or freighted from there to Los Alamos. We were told, my dad was to ever get on at the Atomic Energy Commission at Sandia Base. Now this happened July 4th, 1947. In January of 1948, my father was hired by the Atomic Energy Commission and worked there at what they called the tech area for 36 years. He retired from the Atomic Energy Commission after 36 years. And the idea of being here, okay, if you got to keep an eye on somebody and you want to know everything about them and their family, well, you just hire them. they knew more about us than we did ourselves. And there was a lot of incidences over those years where we would be questioned by people who obviously were part of the security. In New Mexico, you know, if you have the ability or the availability of a swimming pool in the summertime, that's pretty cool. Well, as a dependent of someone who worked at the tech area at Sandia Base, at the Sandia Special Weapons Development Center, you were issued an ID card. That ID card would get you through the gates. You could use swimming pools, movie theaters. You could go to the D-dunks. You could do just about anything you wanted as long as you didn't go near that tech area. That would get you shot. Okay? But every time we would go out to the base, to kids on the bicycles, you know, we're going swimming, man. We're going to spend a whole day out there at the military swimming pool. Well, they'd look at our cards as we were going through, and the very second they seen mine, I'd start getting interrogated. Have you ever told anybody about what you saw out there, boy? You know, that kind of thing. We learned really early on, most of us kids, that because our parents did work in a top secret area, that if somebody approached us and started asking questions, does your daddy work here? Does your mommy work here? Yeah. What does your daddy do? You need to ask my dad. We learned that real quick in life. You don't talk to these people. And when we go through the gate, now, have you told anybody about that? Your dad works here now, doesn't he? What's he do? I don't know, man. You're going to have to talk to him. And this went on for years and years and years. And basically, that's the story in a nutshell. I didn't want to bore you all to death with all the details that goes with this. But last June, we went back to the crash site. And we started finding stuff that the military missed. And he's going to tell you all about that here in just a minute. So that's it, and thank you very much. And I think we're going to, thank you. I think we're going to have a little question and answer thing here. Are we going to let them ask questions?
I got just about 5 minutes.
We're going to ask the audience if they have questions here in just a little bit. What I'd like to do is explain just a wee bit of why I'm involved with the Plains of San Augustine, because up until 2004, I basically never heard or cared much about the Plains. But in 2004, I was at the Aztec Symposium, and one of the presenters was a Mr. Art Campbell, and he had parts and pieces on the table there at his presentation of parts and pieces he had received and gotten off the Plains of San Augustine. As soon as he stepped off stage, I shook hands, we became friends, and in the spring of 2004, that was maybe about March, a couple months later, we went down to the Plains of San Augustine. I hired 4 Navajos. We made 4 big old tripods, and folks, we made and moved dirt. We found parts and pieces. I hold in my hand small pieces out of larger pieces, and these pieces have been thoroughly, wonderfully analyzed and absolutely not of this earth. If I'd have one slide about the crosscut. Okay. This slide right here to me is worth 1,000,000 words, because this piece of metal is looking at the end of the piece of metal, and the metal is basically the thickness of a sheet of paper, maybe 2 sheets of paper. And those white spots are iron particles. And if you'll notice, there's iron particles on that side. There's iron particles on this side, over here and over there. That's a huge piece there. Folks, that piece of metal cannot be made in gravity. That metal had to be made in non-gravity somewhere that they do that. But they're going to have to do a lot of it, because we found a lot of metal. And every piece of metal we have basically is a different thickness, and we've had it analyzed, and it's different composition. It's extremely complex. And I have about a 40-some page report in my website you're welcome to come to. It's chuckwadeufo.com. And we're going to have, I've got 18 pieces of metal in the lab now. And I'd like to tell you one of the most exciting things I've ever seen in my whole life was whenever we were on the plains of San Augustine not too long back. Gerald Anderson here was using a metal detector. A lady that has been following my research for several years now, Cara Fay, and her friend who is a botanist, they were there, and then my wife and I. And Gerald, right after we got there, he went to where this craft had crashed. I know where we'd found pieces before, but we had never been to where this thing crashed. So we went up there, and boy, that metal detector went off, and my wife and I got down on our knees, and the botanist got her tools out, and Cara Fay was filming. We brought up out of the ground this piece right here. That is a major, major find. This is the outside of the craft. And we have another piece, and thinking about this larger piece, this number here is the 1101. It looks very, very similar to Wade 6. And then we found another piece that goes on to this here, about an inch and a half thick, and it looks like a honeycomb, and it looked like the day that it was made, except it had really taken a pounding. Whatever that thing is made out of, it has been buried for 65 years, and it looked like it just come off the polishing machine. I don't know what it's made out of, but it's being worked on now. And then on the inside of that, there is another sheet of metal this right here is about a 16th of an inch, the other one's about a 32nd of an inch, and that makes the outside skins of the UFO. Folks, we've got the goods, we've got the metal, we've got the analysis, we've got Gerald Anderson. Folks, this stuff is real, and that's what I want to leave you with on my talk. Then I have 8 suggestions and comments that I'd like to put on film and record, because we've got some really bad science going on here, and I'd like to put these 8 items on record. I suggest that the book, the Roswell incident, be updated to take out where 2 UFOs ran together and crashed. That is absolutely false. These crafts happened to have crashed on different days. They could not have come together. But I have heard very recently the author of that book say that they ran together. That's impossible. Item number 2. In 2004, I was at the museum there in Roswell, and there's people on stage saying that the UFO did not crash on the plains of San Augustine. I had parts of that craft in my pocket, so I gave parts of that craft to the museum to have tested. That piece of metal was tested very poorly by Seals Laboratory out in California. They only looked at the side, and the Seal said it was only aluminum foil with silicon from the sand. Folks, I have analysis saying that is not true. Well, it has that, but there's a whole lot more to it. I request the UFO Museum in Roswell to retest metal from my collection. A couple of 3 years ago, I gave 22 samples of metal to a Mr. Bill Burns from the UFO Hunter. He said that he was going to have this metal tested. So far, I have not heard one word from Bill Burns. I hereby request Bill Burns to analyze that metal. Let me have a copy of the results, and we'll put it on my website and let the world see what is being denied. Here recently, this year, there was a lady author came out with a book about the Area 51, and in this book she states very plainly that the UFO crash by Roswell was made by Russians. That's absurd. I have held parts of that craft in my hand, and it looks very similar to the metal I've that I have. It also has been analyzed, and it's really, really complicated, not the foil. Next item. Last year, a very known author came out with a 520-page book proving that the crash that crashed there by Corona was made by Germans. Once again, that's absurd. And I think that these guys guys and gals should give an apology for their ignorance. The Jim Ragsdale site, don't have it on here. Some of these researchers say that did not happen because Jim Ragsdale came forward and signed 2 different affidavits saying where this craft happened. The first time that Jim Ragsdale signed an affidavit, he said it was north of Roswell. And I can understand Jim doing that because just like Gerald Anderson had gone through, he knew that people had been threatened with their lives if they told the truth. So Jim said not quite the truth. He said that the crash that he was involved with what happened north of Roswell just a few days before he died. And I've seen the film. His son-in-law was taping Jim Ragsdale, and Jim was telling his daughter what happened. Folks, a deathbed confession outweighs 2 affidavits, or contradiction affidavits, any day in the book. Jim Ragsdale's crash happened, and I really think it's time that we let Jim rest in peace with his name intact. I have been in lectures when the speakers will stand there and tell the audience the craft that crashed on the plains of St. Augustine did not happen. Folks, that is idiotic. I personally have been there. I've got materials from it. I know Gerald Anderson. He was there because he knew precisely where that craft had hit. We found these big pieces there where it hit. I've been there digging on places where we didn't know where it hit. Therefore, we didn't find these big pieces. And with that, I want to say, Gerald, I want to thank you for your wonderful presentation tonight and what you've gone through, and audience. How many of y'all would like to come to the birthday party in the morning at Denny's for cake and coffee and ice cream? Oh, there you go. I'll see you in the morning about 10 o'clock at Denny's. Thank you ever so much. The third and last movie, and this year I'm going to look around and see if those 3 aliens are going to get me again. That was really fun last year. The next film I think you'll really enjoy. I've seen it once on the big screen like this here. It's made by Jaime Massad and from Mexico. There's more UFOs in this film than you can even count. Oh, one other thing I just remembered, and they put on the screen here. This is the isotopic ratios of 3 different elements that is in wave 1. Folks, if it was made on this Earth, the numbers on the right-hand side, which is terrestrial, meaning Earth, and the one on the left, the samples that came and I furnished from the plains of St. Augustine, these numbers would be basically the same thing. They're not. They're off by factors of 9, and well, you can see them there. This stuff was not made on Earth, and there's absolutely the proof by the isotopic ratios. And with that, we'll see you in the morning for cake and ice cream, and have a good evening. Enjoy the next film. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
First time this material has been seen in public, and you are the ones who saw it for the first time. This material was picked up at the initial crash site, which was obviously recontoured. I've been screaming for years that there was a lot of debris up there. Well, we went up there with metal detectors, and we hadn't walked Well, you have to understand, this area that we're working on is about 7.5 acres. This is a big area. Walked up there with a metal detector, turned it on, set it to read all metal, took 2 more steps, and the metal detectors started screaming their heads off. Not only mine, but the other one was up there too. And that's what we found 18 inches under the surface of the earth. Right there. And this is not manufactured on this planet. Thank you very much. We'll see you all at breakfast in the morning out there with the ice cream and the cake.